Hello, everyone. Let's say that you want to buy a house. And in terms of going to buy a house, the first thing I would recommend is you go to your bank or mortgage provider and get pre approved. That way, you know how much you can spend without, any guesswork. Then you know what they will approve for your loan. Let's say they approve you to be able to buy a house that will cost you, we'll go at the top of this, $475,000, and you have $80,000 you're paying down. Well, the payment on that for a 30-year loan with PMI is $2996.76. Now, the bank says, yeah, you can afford this because we calculated everything. Fine. But let's say you want to do something different. And here's why it might pay for you to decide to do something different. Let's say in the neighborhood there's some little bit cheaper, maybe smaller houses for in the $340,000 range instead of spending the $475. You take the difference in what your payments will be is over $1,000 less, not almost, over $1,000 less for the same terms as this is, 30 years. But if you do buy this house, you can opt for a shorter loan of 20 years and pay $2250, a savings of nearly $750 over buying the bigger house every month. And you're paid off 10 years sooner, which is really nice. Now, let's say you even wanted to go with a 15-year loan. It is over $300 less on the loans, and you'll be paid off in half the time. Instead of being locked into this and obligated to pay $2996.76 a month for 30 years, well, it drops after the PMI goes away, but it's still, a bit. You can be paid off and save $300+ a month in 15 years. Now, let's say you don't want to go with a house quite that big and you go with a $250,000 house, which is in the same general vicinity as these, but just a little cheaper house, a little smaller. If you go with this for 15 years, $250,000 home, you're paying $80,000 down. You're going to pay $1,782. So if you went with this house instead of this house, that payment, this payment instead of that payment, you're saving something like $1,200 a month on a 15-year loan. You'll be paid off way sooner. Now, let's say you want to go 20 years, and you don't have any PMI on this one, but you go 20 years on this one, and your payment's going to be just over half what that one is, saving you $1,400+ a month. You went 30 years, it'd be $1,380, which is $1,600 a month less than this. With saving that from going with what the bank says and paying that kind of payment. And somebody might say, well, this is unrealistic because most people can't buy this kind of house. Whatever it is, if you buy exactly what the bank tells you you can afford by what you make right now, you're obligating yourself to, usually they say about 40% of your pay goes for housing. That's usually how they determine that, something like that. It might be slightly higher or lower. But if you go for a little bit smaller and cheaper house and reduce your payments in years by this much, instead of paying that much for 30 years, you're paying $1,780 and change for 15 years. In 15 years, your house will be yours. You went this way, you got 15 more years of paying this kind of money. Once this is paid off, it will make a huge difference in your budget. And at this point, once this is paid off, you have a lot of options You have a lot of extra money that isn't getting obligated to be paid for something. So anyway, just because someone tells you you can afford a certain amount doesn't mean you have to go that route. If you do, that's fine, long as nothing happens. But say something does happen, you have to take a pay cut. You took a loan on this and you had to take a pay cut, all of a sudden this becomes a lot harder to afford. That is one reason why you might want to go a little bit less of a house than what they say you can afford, so your payment don't make up such a high percentage of your earned money. This is a lot less obligation than that is. And over 30 years versus 15, lots of things can happen in 15 years, but in 30 years, a lot more things can happen. So it's like, it's an option to think about. Personally, I'm not a financial advisor or anything, but I think that you don't have to do what everybody says you can do. You can do what you feel like is best for you and not worry about what everybody else says is best for you or what is good for you to do. And that's my take on this, on buying anything large like a home, because it's a large expenditure and a lot of money to buy this house for this long. And whereas if you buy this house, sure, it's less, a lot less actually, but you're not going to be locked into payments so high for so long. A lot of people say in 5 or 10 years you refinance this one to a different. You're still starting with an expensive house to begin with. And you could always refinance this one later as well if, say, interest would come down, because these are 6.7 rates, which is a bit higher than they've been recently. I mean, if interest rates would go down again some and this would drop to about 5 or 4.5, then it would make sense probably to refinance then. But that's just my take on this. Don't always have to go with the most expensive thing you can afford. Status might seem nice, but in the future, status can come back to bite you, because you might, like I said, you lock into this, you could find yourself out of a job and not be able to afford it. And that's not something anybody probably wants to do. Anyway, if you like this kind of stuff, these kind of videos, like and subscribe, and I will thank you.